Hello and welcome to our program. I'm Ken Clark, the editor of Hardware and Building Supply Dealer, and this is the future of the last mile, AI, delivery engagement, and the new standard for on time and in full. And with us to discuss OTIF, which is one of my favorite industry acronyms, on time, in full, are two industry professionals from Descartes Solutions who have given this topic a lot of thought. Cindy Brandt is the Vice President of Fleet Solutions for Descartes, and Sergio Torres is the Senior Vice President of Product Management for Descartes. Welcome to the program, Cindy and Sergio. Cindy, can we start with you? Can you describe the most immediate operational challenges for leaders in the last mile delivery arena and how they may be accelerating?
Absolutely, Ken. Right now, most fleet and last mile leaders are dealing with a combination of crazy cost pressures, labor challenges, and much, much higher customer expectations. I mean, costs across the board right now, whether it's fuel, especially fuel lately, right? Insurance, equipment, and labor have drastically increased. This means that all of a sudden there's inefficiencies that might have been tolerated a little bit a couple of years ago, but now they're going to show up super fast within their existing margins. And then the second piece of it is that customers expect far more transparency and precision in delivery. Why? Because they see that in their own B2C or consumer lives, right? 2 or 3 years ago, you could use an incredibly broad time window, and that would have been acceptable. No one would have batted an eye at it. But today, customers expect super accurate ETAs, real-time updates, and a delivery experience that's going to be similar to what they get from a major e-commerce provider. And then last, just to really sew this up, I think what's really changed in the last mile, there's a big shift going on, right? It used to just be viewed purely as a logistics function, get the stuff out the door, get it to our customers. But now they realize it's part of customer experience. It's a much larger piece of cost. So they really have to balance operational efficiency with service expectations of their customers.
And it's my understanding that there are significant gaps between planning for the last mile delivery and what actually happens on the road. Can you talk about those?
Oh, absolutely. It's one of my favorite subjects, actually. This big gap that exists today, it always is a result of, a lack in optimal planning. And even if you have that optimal plan, as soon as drivers hit the road, 9 times out of 10, the plan goes out the window. It could have been because of traffic. It could have been because I couldn't get to a site to unload. It could have been because somebody wasn't at the site to receive the product. Routing always kind of assumes, if you will, an ideal condition. But in reality, it isn't, right? Because it's not based in reality sometimes, many fleets still rely super heavily on dispatchers and drivers to just go ahead and adjust that plan throughout the day. Drivers will resequence, they'll do workarounds, they'll change things based on local knowledge. It keeps your deliveries moving, but when drivers take shortcuts, I have to say they're always long cuts because it will always result in inefficiency. And then, of course, visibility, right? Without visibility, you can't dispatch your team super effectively and efficiently and have a clear picture of what's happening across the fleet until some problem actually occurs and someone picks up the phone and says something. These fleets that are closing the gap most effectively are ones that keep investing in tools so they can make adjustments proactively as opposed to reactively. And I think we'll have some more interesting conversation about that today.
Sergio, can you explain to the audience the phrase static service time estimates and why this assumptions around them could cause problems?
Thank you, Ken. Thanks for letting us be here in your program. Look, the static service times, I mean, they have been around for a long time. And this is historically because they were basically the simpler way to actually create route plans. And, if every stop is assumed to take roughly the same amount of time, routing engines can build plans quickly and operations can standardize around those assumptions. The problem is that delivery operations are a little bit more complex than static use cases. A pallet drop at a retail location is very different from a multi-product delivery to an active construction site. So when those differences aren't really captured in the plan, the routes tend to look efficient on paper, but they break down during execution. So that leads to missed delivery windows, underutilized trucks, and in some cases, and overloaded routes in others, right? So the industry is starting to recognize that accurate service times estimations are one of the biggest levers, if you will, for improving route reliability and network performance. So that's where we're going, Ken.
Well, what do you see happens when more modern tools are applied to the problem? What are the differences?
Well, when you're starting to actually use modern tools, you realize basically that the data is the foundation of those modern tools to actually make them work. So, when you actually, and speaking specifically, we were talking about static service times in general. When you actually use, modern tools to actually learn about your service times, then you're actually starting to build routes that are more realistic. So instead of assuming that every stop behaves the same way, and that the system begins to account for variables like, with like a product mix that you have on the truck, the order size, the location characteristics, geography, delivery method, even a historical behavior in that customer, modern tools are actually collecting all that data so that you can actually learn from it and readjust your plans and service times based on what you learn from what your drivers are actually experiencing every day. I mean, in some cases, when you actually use that to actually affect your plan to create more reliable plans, we have seen improvements on route density significantly. I mean, sometimes as much as 20 to 30% improvements without adding any trucks or drivers. And it's simply because you're actually planning better, using the right tools to actually learn from them and then apply it to your plans.
Thank you, Sergio. And that kind of leads us into AI. We used the phrase AI in our headline. That was there to generate audience and excitement in this program. But what are the real world benefits of AI when it comes to last mile delivery?
Ken, I mean, AI right now is definitely one of the biggest topics in our space right now. The real value we're seeing isn't necessarily in flashy real-time routing changes. A lot of the noise on the market around AI-based routing might suggest that, hey, we're going to deliver stop 7 before stop 2. And you know what? That's not safe, number one. And number two, it's oftentimes not practical, right? You don't want to have to unload a truck. We don't want someone doing anything unsafe. Instead, we're proposing that you really use AI to approach the problem 100% differently. We believe you need to gather execution data, apply machine learning, which is a subset of artificial intelligence, and use it in the planning tool to create far more accurate route plans. When you use AI or machine learning against the execution data, now you can understand better geocodes where customers are actually located. If you've delivered to them more than once, which isn't always the case in building supply, but I might really know what time of day they really prefer based on those prior deliveries. And then third, the actual service time it takes to deliver to that stop or those particular types of products. Because we all know nothing in building supplies is equal when it comes to taking it off a truck.
Right. And you talked about kind of a wide range of benefits. When we go to big events like the Builder Show recently, we saw systems for routing, customer communication, analytics. How do you move in the industry from kind of a disconnected collection of these platforms into kind of a unified approach? Sergio, can you take that?
Sure, Ken. Look, as Cindy alluded, basically is the key is that we're gonna talk about AI. It has to be actually the biggest piece that is embedded within your workflow. But it's not only AI; it's got to do also across the different systems that you're utilizing. Right. One of the biggest shifts we are seeing in fleets moving away from fragmented point solutions to our more connected operational platform. So historically, routing, dispatch, driver execution, customer communications, and you mentioned analytics, often live in separate systems that creates basically gaps in the visibility and makes it difficult to respond quickly when conditions change. So leading fleets today are now focusing on platforms that bring those functions together. So decisions made in planning can flow through executions and customer communication. So when routing, dispatch, telematics, and customer engagement tools are all connected, fleets gain a much clearer view and greater control of their operation. And they can manage delivery performance as one coordinated system rather than a series of disconnected tools.
All right, Sergio used the phrase execution. That's where the rubber meets the road, quite literally in this case. Cindy, how are fleets improving delivery execution? Can you just talk about once you get the routing settled, what's the next step toward improved execution?
So for years and years, we've always said, create a plan. Having a plan is better than no plan at all. And then apply execution. Most of the companies out there that we've seen today, they've invested in some type of tool that provides what I'm going to call near real-time GPS. And then they use it to understand exactly where that vehicle is. The real challenge is knowing where they're supposed to be relative to where they are, right? So it's imperative to use both a planning tool and an execution tool hand in hand to be able to give you the right information at the right time. We see more and more fleets, they're insisting that their integrations are either native solutions or tightly integrated with what they have, so they get the most accurate information. Execution to me is kind of always like the 1-2 punch. If you have a plan, that's great, but you don't know what's actually happening throughout the day. So that execution tool becomes really important to see actual versus planned. The second piece of it is something I alluded to, and Sergio did a little bit earlier as well, is capturing that execution data. It's a gold mine to make your operations more effective and efficient.
And I imagine from the customer or the contractor standpoint, they want to know where their product is. Can you talk about the tools that allow that to happen?
Well, if you think about our own lives, right? We receive proactive notifications almost nonstop, whether it is information about a doctor's appointment, your delivery to your home, or even going to a restaurant for dinner, right? But in the B2B world, it's just over the last several years that format has really started to be embraced. The key here really is that something everybody thought was a nice to know has all of a sudden become a must have. I need to know information about the fact that my order was received. A couple of days before, I'd like to know when and where it's coming. The day of, I'd like to narrow down the time so I can free up personnel on the job site to meet the truck and make sure things get delivered to the right spot. So, things start to really change there. And the reason that everything's changing so much is that margins are starting to really tighten, right, across the entire industry. Costs are increasing exponentially. We need to make sure as building supply companies that, the contractors know exactly what's coming to which job, when, why. Well, first and foremost, we want to make sure we can reduce claims. Second, we want to make sure someone's there to meet high value products so it doesn't grow legs and walk off by itself. And third, we also want to make sure that people can get us to the right part of the job site, right? So for letting people know when we're actually going to arrive, we have a much higher rate of success and a much lower rate of claims being initiated.
Sergio, there's an old saying that culture eats strategy for breakfast. You can invest in technologies and platforms, but how do you get the crew, the team to use them to their fullest capability is always a big issue. Can you talk about the organizational change that has to take effect in order to really maximize the power of these tools?
Yeah, you got it, Ken. That's a very, very, very current topic. I mean, it happens on every single implementation that we face. And Look, we got to understand that technology alone doesn't really improve operations. Adoption does. So, the fleets that see the most success uh, treat these systems as operational transformation tools, not just a software deployment. This is super important. That means involving the different stakeholders, planners, dispatchers, management, drivers at a very early stage. We got to make sure that the tools fit into the real workflows and measuring outcomes like on-time performance, route productivity, and customer satisfaction so that they realize what the tool is actually doing for them and helping them. So when the technology becomes really part of the decision making, rather than something that sits along the side in the operation, that's when the benefits really start to compound. Okay.
Well said. So looking ahead over the next 12 to 18 months, Cindy, what are the tech capabilities, the tools that are going to separate the winners from the losers in this fleet industry?
It's a great question. I think over the next 12 to 18 months, the biggest separator won't just be who has the newest technology. We can all go buy new technology that doesn't solve the problems if we don't have adoption, right? But the real winner is going to be who connects planning, execution, and learning into one continuous loop. And when I say learning, I mean getting the data and learning from that data. So many fleets today still operate 100% in silos. Planning happens in one system, execution happens over here, and it gets changed on the road. But the insights from what actually happened rarely, if ever, make it the way back into the next day's plan, if you will. High-performing fleets are really looking to close that loop down. They're using real execution data to make plans more realistic. They've got real-time visibility into what's happening across the fleet throughout the day. And they're equipping drivers and dispatchers with tools that help them adapt when those conditions inevitably change. So I really think at the end of the day, the fleets that will win won't just be the ones with the smartest tech. They'll be those ones that transform their daily operations.
And in the closing moments of our program, Sergio, I turn to you to talk about how artificial intelligence, how is that going to shape the way distributors plan, execute, and communicate with their customers?
Look, there's no question that looking ahead, AI will definitely increasingly help fleets move from reactive operations to more predictive operations. Instead of responding after a bad event like delays occurring, for instance, the systems will continue to analyze, as Cindy mentioned, will continue to analyze what we actually learn from the operational patterns, job site behavior, traffic conditions, geography, historical delivery performance, driver basically experience, and anticipate, basically gather that data so that we can anticipate issues before they happen. So that's where AI comes into play. This tool, this technology will enable basically fleets to have plans that are not only efficient, but they are more realistic. And also it allows for route compliance from a driver. It allows basically service level agreements compliance for customers, right? So this will actually allows us to create those plans that are more resistant to variability that we have and experience every single day in the real world. The most successful organizations will focus on augmentation rather than replacement. We're not trying to replace actually people. We're actually trying to make them more efficient. So technology really can analyze massive amounts of operational data, and it generates actually smarter plans and faster. But human experience is also very critical. We need to make sure that humans actually look at the problem, understand the context, exceptions, and customer relationships, because AI or the automation doesn't have that information. Over time, I think AI will become just part of an operational fabric. It's going to be just on our everyday day lives, and it will basically be helping distributors and fleets to plan smarter, execute more consistently with obviously better predictability, and communicate with customers in ways that create a far more reliable delivery experience.
All right, we're now going to show a slide with the email addresses for how the audience can contact Sergio and Cindy, along with the website for Descartes. Sergio and Cindy, thanks so much for sharing your expertise today.
It was a pleasure.
Pleasure, Ken. Thank you.